Throw away the lies. Throw away the lies. Throw away the lies. The joys in this life. Don't buy all that talk about denying your light.
While doing some research for a previous documentary project, I came across a really unusual website that would lead me on an unusual journey.
I began my website and decided to call it helpmereversemysexchange.org. The website is to bring awareness to what I'm going through, what other people are going through, and maybe people that, are compassionate might give some financial assistance to help me out and, to tell my story.
The seeds of this film began when I traveled to South Dakota, where I met the website's author, Judy. Some months and after a number of emails and phone conversations, she had agreed to meet with me. I was intrigued to learn more about her story. Both her past and future would prove to be pretty fascinating.
I thought I was going to be a real woman. It was almost like I thought that life that I used to have, it's gone, it's dead, it's almost like a soul transplant. I am going to be a woman. Yes, surgically, I had surgery to become a woman, but I am a woman now. But living that life and chasing that dream for so many years, I've got 21 years living as a woman behind me now at age 41. You go through a lot of experiences that just kind of say, that dream is really not going to happen.
Filming my conversations and later editing this piece, one could say this is actually like two films. One is about Judy and her life, the other about my travels and conversations with just a very small part of the transgender community. By relaying their stories, I hope to unravel the mystery I perceived of what it means to be transgender. I spoke with a number of fascinating and diverse group of women about their lives. Yet these are people almost like myself, mostly over 40, white, and labeled male at birth. Combined, this is as much a film about society and the way people who are considered different are treated, as much as a film about the people I met. Looking for some other perspectives, I traveled to Baltimore, where I met Georgie and two of her friends, Elaine and Remy.
You go into a garage or something like that, and they look at you and say, and you know darn well what's wrong with the car.
Right.
And you go out and you have to bite your tongue and say, I just don't know what's wrong with the car. And then this guy comes out and says, well, ma'am, it could be your wheel turning wrong or the windshield fell off. And you're going, no, it's that.
You've got to put it in drive first.
Yeah, you get told the whole thing.
Right.
And it's a bunch of bull.
Right. You know it.
Yeah, and they're walking around, sticking out the chest and
I noticed that
playing pocket pool or whatever they do.
Of course, I know absolutely nothing about cars, but
Georgie, we can admit to that. You don't.
Yeah. But the little bit that I do know, I know that they're taking advantage of me because they think I'm a, biological woman, and all the stereotypes go.
And you only bought your car based on its color.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I did.
My first conscious thoughts was that somehow or another I was born into the wrong body. And I say that, meaning, in retrospect and with, searching out knowledge for myself that, that's the only perspective that we have. We live in a culture that's that views, everything as either this or that. It's black or white, male or female.
Early recollections, and I've compared notes with other transsexual folks, both male and female, and this is something we usually figure out about ourselves as early as age 5 and 6. We know something's awry all the way back then.
The first time I ever cross-dressed, I was probably about 6 years old. And when I would be out playing, I did a lot of it by myself, being in the country and everything else, because I didn't have the structure of other children around to basic. So for me to be cross-dressing, I almost kind of felt, oh, this is natural stuff to do, So it was, I guess when I really got the point, I was about 14.
The way people handle themselves, present themselves, varies from person to person. I put on quite a different show. I was Remy the Macho Guy. I was Remy the Disc Jockey. I liked being a macho guy. I liked working in the broadcasting business. I liked being a rock and roll disc jockey. I mean, I knew how I felt, and I couldn't accept the way I felt. I thought it was crazy to feel this way because there wasn't anything you could do about it.
I dropped out of school when I was 17, and my dad was, as I say, one of these type that, you know, either you go back to school or you go in the service. And of course I was strong-headed, and I said, well, I'm going in the service. And that's what I did. So I joined the Army when I was 18 years old, and then they shipped me over to Vietnam in '67. But all that time that I was, you know, in the military, I was still finding places where I could cross-dress. Yeah.
Even in Vietnam?
Even in Vietnam. Yeah. Even in Vietnam. You know, I might go out behind the hangars or something like that at night where no one could see me. Really? Yeah. It was that strong for me.
I was pretty much, you know, for all intents and purposes, your stereotypical boy. I mean, I you know, played cowboys and Indians and Army, and my father owned a toy business, so I had access to dolls, and I had some in my playthings incorporated in there, and I utilized that, you know, in kind of a private way, being a little too embarrassed to reveal myself. I loved playing football, and it wasn't because I had a father sitting there, go be a man, you know, go, you know, I just loved it. I mean, I was a tomboy, you know. You don't hear that a lot from a lot of transsexuals, because a lot of transsexuals, oh yeah, I always wanted to play with dolls, and oh, you know, and I always helped my mom cook and sew, and it's like none of that. But what's more strong and what's more powerful about that is that it gets to the mystery of what we as transgendered people are and why we represent that big mystery, because there is no logical reason why I am the way I am.
Unlike most I would speak with who had clarity about their journeys, Judy somehow seemed less able to define or fully explain the beginnings of her transgender experience at such a young age.
Along with puberty, there was a hormone imbalance where the breast tissue kind of started to grow. There's a medical term for it in males. It's called gynecomastia, breast growth in males. And when I was 14, went to, you know, my regular physician for a camp checkup, because every year my mom would send me and my sister off to camp. And he said, oh, this happens, you know, sometimes to like 4 out of 9 boys, but it'll go away. Well, in me, it never went away. This was my secret time. It was like when anybody left the house, I would dress and become the girl that I kind of felt I was. As an effeminate male and trying to like girls and be straight didn't quite work out either for me. And I was just on this, it was like I was on this kind of road of no return. Years later, when I was 18 years old and going to gay bars, I saw these female impersonators on stage, and I couldn't believe that some of these guys were guys. I mean, they had breasts, and I was like, to my friend, I was like, how did they get breasts? And my friend would say, well, they take hormones, and some of them get breast implants. And I was like, you know, like a light bulb went off in my head. Well, maybe this is the answer. I don't feel comfortable being a homosexual. You know, I'd had that homosexual experiment for like 1.5 years. And I said, well, maybe if I become a girl and I can become a beautiful girl, then nobody will ever tease me again and call me a faggot. And by that time, I was sexually involved enough with men that I'd begun to find the pleasure in sex with men.
My trip would also take me to North Carolina, where I stayed with Holly, who operates a bed and breakfast, which is often the site of retreats and workshops for members of the trans community.
Well, really, since earliest memories, I had a fascination with, beautiful things, sensuality, feminine values like that. So I was kind of intrigued. Long about the time I was maybe 6 or 7, I got wind of Tinkerbell and the fairy world. And I just realized, oh, well, I must be a fairy. Because they were kind of like between genders, and they were magical and not quite of this world. And that's how I felt. I found myself feeling really cheated and deprived of being able to express the so-called feminine aspects of my being. I knew that was taboo. I knew I would be mistreated if I exposed that.
Closer to home in Florida, I met with Randy, who lives with her long-term spouse on a small farm where they raise miniature horses and other animals.
Very feminine, always picked on in school, and there was no there was no hiding this. You know what I mean? There was no hiding who I was. And even though if you tried to pretend that you were more masculine, of course, forget it. People have read through it. People saw through it all. My family were, they weren't happy, but they also weren't the type of people that would throw you out in the street, and say, I had a very wonderful father who even took me to Miami when, we found out, about this doctor down there who did the sex change operation. My father, who is a very strict Italian man, very strict Italian man, and he took me down there, and because he knew, as a child, my father was a baseball player in college, in Seton Hall College, and so he knew. And what are you going to do? You have to love your children. It's very hurtful. It's a very hurtful childhood. People pick on you, especially if you're a true transgender. They, some people hide it for years and years, and then all of a sudden I don't know if they decide they are. I know people have gotten married, they've been in the army, they've been this and that, and to try to fit in and to do the right thing. But see, I couldn't do that. I tried to fit in, and I thought, at a certain point, I thought, well, who are you kidding? They know, who are you kidding, So I was just who I was, and of course it's a very hard life, going through high school and everything like that.
In the beautiful surroundings of southern Colorado, I met with Marcy. She's a surgeon at a local hospital.
I guess you'd say I had a traditional upbringing in the sense of growing up in a small town where you didn't lock the doors, and I tried to play football in the streets with the kids and baseball in the park. It wasn't all that comfortable for me in the sense that I wasn't all that competitive. I wasn't really built. I wasn't really a boy, but I did my best because that's all I had to deal with. I've kind of left that behind. A lot of people carry their transgendered status with them, but or their male history with them. But I think it's really is important in the process to leave it as much behind as possible. I feel. I mean, obviously you bring some things with you, but I think in order to live really a legitimately woman's life, I think you have to leave as much of that behind as you can.
During a trip to Los Angeles, I met with Rosalind, who is a social worker who presented an interesting perspective. While she's written a book about her journey, which began as a young boy back in Brooklyn, she defines herself as a heterosexual woman. I learned that she represents a largely unseen part of the trans community, who are hesitant to be defined by or even speak about their transgender history. Yet she would offer some insight into the social and political aspects of what it means to be transgender.
The word transgender, transsexual is a lot more diverse than people actually understand, and there are many different places in which somebody could fall on this continuum of challenging gender identity and gender presentation. And a person of transsexual experience is not discussing his or her transsexual history. They have the opportunity to live, to be, to be engaged in the world as who they are. Once they are out or outed or spooked, or however somebody figures out that they have this transsexual identity, it changes the way that person relates.
Judy, whose modest clothing reflected the Orthodox Jewish lifestyle she had recently adopted, revealed a past quite different from her current life on the plains of South Dakota.
Well, I say girlfriend, but it was somebody else like me, a male to female transsexual. She was planning to have her surgery done overseas in Europe, and she was getting ready to leave town. She was working as a dancer, and I said, well, how about I go with you and I'll get my surgery done in Europe too, you know, and I'll kind of follow the dream that I want to be a model. So we went off to Europe and followed that dream. And while I was in Europe, that's when I scheduled surgery. I was really very happy about this because I felt like this was going to finally complete my life as female, and I would be able to live a normal life. You know, working nights in a pub as a barmaid, and on Sunday nights in the pub, it was entertainment night. They would have girls come in, and they had a stage set up, and they were doing kind of like burlesque striptease. And they said, you would be great. And I was sort of introduced into the world of being what you might call a stripper. And I found that I was making more money stripping than I was trying to get a modeling career off the ground. And when I came back to the United States, I had a girlfriend that had got into being a go-go dancer, and she was bringing home lots of money, and I said, well, hey, can I get a job where you're working? You know, I did something very similar to this over in the United Kingdom. And so that kind of took a shift in my career from being, you know, like a clothes horse model to being a no-clothes model. Bottomless dancing meant the top's off, the bottom's off, no G-string. All I had on was my high heels and Chanel No. 5.
During my Baltimore visit, I also met with author and performer Kate Bornstein. She was in the area conducting workshops on gender issues at a nearby university.
I was born in 1948 on the New Jersey shore. My father was a medical doctor, my mom a school teacher. I have one brother. It was just a nice upper middle class home. There were the four of us. We were totally the Leave It to Beaver family. That made me the Beaver. Growing up in the 50s, when gender was such an important component of class and the culture itself, and such a rigid component, there was no question that I was going to grow up to be a manly man doctor like my father, so that's the path I was walking on. I went to an all-boys high school. I got accepted into Brown University, into pre-med. I went there, and on day one, when I saw all the math requirements for pre-med, I dropped out of pre-med, much to my father's dismay, and became a theater major. I graduated as Brown University's first major in theater arts. That was my love. That's what I wanted to do.
During my trip to North Carolina, I also visited with Beth, a truly warm and gracious Southern woman.
I think I matured a little bit later than most of the other boys as far as puberty was concerned. Even though I was one of the leaders of the crowd, I didn't want anybody to know that I hadn't masturbated yet. All the other boys were having this rite of passage, and I was late on that and not being able to do it. And I actually, that occurred for me, and I don't know where my idea, I can't go back that far to remember, but I actually, it involved my sister's underwear. And so at that point that happened, and I hope my sister doesn't see this because she would be terribly upset. But yeah, I lived a whole life totally immersed in this very, well, not very, but somewhat powerful person who was the athlete, who was the good old boy. And I went to college on an athletic scholarship, football scholarship actually. Really? Yes. And boy, that added and then joining the fraternity in college and being very active and being the one who could drink the most alcohol, that helped with this charade that I was living. Ended up going into business with my father in a sawmill. And then he died in 1975, and so from that period on, for the next 20-some years, I ran the sawmill. And I was really the gruff lumber person. You know?
How many, do you have employees?
50 employees. Yeah. It was quite interesting for somebody that didn't know what in the world they were doing. But as a result, also, in the end, before I moved here 10 years ago, I had put my company in Chapter 11 reorganization because I couldn't, I was living a lie with what the business was, I think, and it forced it into an area that it couldn't work.
I was really intrigued by the candid conversations I was able to have with these women. Many talked about their difficult struggles for gender harmony that continued in spite of efforts to lead what society would refer to as more traditional lives. It seems once the truth is revealed, family relationships and marriages are affected with a variety of outcomes.
You know, as far as trans, there's still a lot of issues around people finding love and true intimacy. You can find love and true intimacy without outing yourself, but once you out yourself, it challenges that. But yet, when you're involved with somebody, you want to be able to just be yourself with them. That's what true intimacy is all about.
And it wasn't until I turned 30 and was married for about a year that I had my breakdown. It was not an easy or nice coming out. And I'm in the mental health clinic over at Fairfax County Hospital when I blurted out the fact that, I really thought I should have been a woman instead of having to go through this kind of macho crap. It's an emotional breakdown. It's a physical breakdown. You become rather dysfunctional. It takes many years to get over that. You have to kind of look back on your life and decide what you want to do with it and how you want to continue with life, if you want to continue with life. And I chose life.
I think it's really been a hard, I know that if we never got together, I would have been down a road that I don't even know if I'd be alive today, really, because I used to hang in the bars.
When I met you, I thought you were a woman. Completely, 100%. And it surprised me. It surprised me altogether. I was just out, just hanging around. Excuse me. I had a New Year's Eve hangover and just started talking to Brandy and just hit it off. Just a fantastic person. It just became a friendship, and we're lovers, but we're also best friends.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
that's deep.
21
it's
years
unusual.
later.
It's unusual, but it happens.
21 years up, down a bumpy road with you. And see, Greg is straight. Greg is really, he is straight. He really is. And if anything were to happen to me or we broke up or whatever, he would find a woman. That's what he would go for.
Really interesting.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. I didn't really start my transgender program until I was close to 50 years old. So, I went through 25 years of marriage, trying to be the He-Man and everything, and yet trying to live somewhat as who I really wanted to be.
I actually have one of the worst examples, because my parents have never come back. In fact, they're farther away now than they've ever been. And it's just odd because I've accomplished so much. You know, my academic career is superlatives. And I've made them so proud in so many ways, and yet they could not think any, I don't know, it's miserable. I could have been a rapist or axe murderer, and they would have been more accepting, I think, of me, much more behind me.
Rosalita come out, that was on the jukebox, and it was playing. I knew the song backwards and forwards in those days, and I used to perform it with the band. And so right in the middle of the bar, I launched into singing that song, and the woman that became my wife saw me singing it, and she came over and started singing right along with me, and it was like, this chick's cool. And it was on our third date that I pulled out a picture that I had taken myself in, dressed as a woman, as a female, and showed it to her. And I figured she'd go running out the door, and that'd be the last that I'd see of her. But, she chose to stick around, and I don't think either one of us knew where the journey was going to take us, but we're still we're like family, we're very, very close.
I didn't tell anybody about my tranny stuff until I was in graduate school. I told one young woman I was dating, and she was really cool about it. Her name was Lexi. From graduate school, I ended up in the Church of Scientology for 12 years. I got pretty high up there in the church, up with working with L. Ron Hubbard. I was first mate on his flagship. We actually had ships. I was married in the Church of Scientology twice. I have a daughter who's still in the church. The marriages helped convince me I was a man. I'd always been attracted to women. And that is, I think, what stopped me from moving ahead in my transsexual journey. How could I be a woman if I loved women? That was my rationale. 12 years later, I left Scientology because it still hadn't handled this notion that the drive to not be a man anymore.
Metal that's on the floorboard will break away, and I got that in my leg the first time. Second time, I got shrapnel in the back area. And this was all from, being in the helicopter and rounds coming up through the helicopter.
The combination of Elaine being haunted by her Vietnam experience and her questions of gender identity had taken its toll.
When I went into the military, I knew that was there, but it was a matter of hiding it. And so that's how I spent my early years, was hiding this by either being in the military, being on police departments, doing all the manly things that you're supposed to do to fool the public. We found out the values, and we found out the non-values in Vietnam. And sometimes people like to go back and see that. It's like going home. But now that I've gotten older and a lot of things have happened to me, I don't have to go back there to know the lesson that I learned. And just like I've never been to the wall in Washington, D.C., I won't go. I lost a lot of good friends. Excuse me. So people that, stayed there and never came home, I feel very guilty that I came home. Because I felt that there was a lot better people that died over there than myself. I had a very low opinion of myself.
When I turned 30, I was in a position, unpartnered, where I had the freedom to explore my gender issues more fully. And was about 2 or 3 years down that path, which was a very joyous one, by the way, when I met my next partner, who was a beautiful Amazon of a woman. We coupled She did go through a little period of cold feet, wondering, oh my God, what am I getting into? But within about 6 months, we got pregnant, intentionally. And as we were negotiating these changes in our lives, she made it clear to me that it was going to be virtually impossible for her to have me continue with what amounted to a full-blown transition of gender while we were married. This would not fly with her parents, with her friends, with her coworkers, or anybody. So I was going to have to put that back in a little box and just bring it out on the weekends or when we're out of town, sort of thing. Being a parent was fantastic, still is. My son is now 19. Just love him dearly. He's my favorite person in the world. But after about maybe 7 years of marriage, my partner decided she had some lesbian issues she needed to explore. I kept telling her she had to be at least bisexual, and she, oh, no. Well, sure enough, she was very curious about women, and I was not woman enough quite for her. So that was heartbreaking for me, and quite ironic in its own way, too. So we parted, gradually got back to a good friendship, and were able to raise our son harmoniously.
If my partner today, if she were to come and tell me that she was going to make this transition, I mean, I would have a problem with it, you know. And so I cannot, you know, it's inevitable that that was not going to work. And of course, I also, at that point when the decision that I made was that I had then to separate and I had to begin my journey. I also, in telling the rest of my family, they did not want me, nor did my wife, and made me promise as I left not to tell my son anything about that. And I promised not to do that for a year. And I actually waited 2 years before I actually wrote a letter to explain to him. He walked in the house, right here, this house, and sat down and he said, I want you to keep your mouth shut. I want to tell you what I think. And so he lit into me for 45 minutes. And a lot of it had to do with what he considered to be my abandonment of his mother. And I didn't say a word. I did just like he said, because there's no need to try and make excuses to say I'm sorry. That doesn't change. Only thing I could say was that I recognized what that meant to him and to her. And then he went out to the car and he came back and he was showing me some pictures on his laptop, and he was going through them, and then he punched up one and we were just sitting there together, and it was his mother's marker. And that just blew me away. And yet it was good because he wanted me to feel that pain that he had felt. He had gotten a little bit overweight. And I just know that he went outside because there's something about you have to shovel your drive out when they plow. I don't know what the deal is, but I know that he went out there and he was not interested in staying long. And so he just went out as hard as he could. And he had a heart attack. To think of them both as being dead and passed on is very difficult and unreal. And so I have to be okay with the family not wanting anything to do with me, not wanting me to be at my son's funeral. Our relationship was what it was, and rather than it being he's just gone, it also is that we've totally reconciled at that point. He's gone, but we are together, and I wish he weren't, so that we could physically be here and make the total reconciliation. But for me just to be at the funeral itself, I felt that the rest of the family's need for me not to be there outweighed my need to be there. And so that's the way it is. I am blamed for his death.
In the state where I was born, in Kentucky, they actually allow someone who's transgendered to change their birth certificate, to have female put on it, in my case, and my female name. And of course, then my ID, my driver's license, had all female on it and everything, and nobody was the wiser. So my 2 marriages the two gentlemen that I married, they were legal marriages. And, you know, in the case of the first marriage, I wasn't truthful. And how many transgendered people that are seeking rights to have their birth certificates changed now, how many of those people are going to be truthful? I mean, doesn't a man or a woman deserve to know if the person that they're marrying was either born as a male or a female and then had a sex change?
Judy explained to me how she came to live in South Dakota. While working as an exotic dancer had been financially rewarding, she had left her past behind and was living a stealth existence, now working in the healthcare field. None of her neighbors, coworkers, or acquaintances knew of her transgender past or former life as a dancer.
I met a really nice guy by the name of Mike, and I'd been divorced about 1.5 years, and he said, you know, South Dakota's a really nice place to move to, you know, just to get away from it all.
As her relationship with Mike, who knew of Judy's past, had blossomed, Judy decided to set down roots in South Dakota. No longer having any contact or support with any of her family members, Judy later told me of the humiliation and isolation she felt after her relationship with Mike failed, and he suddenly announced that he too wanted to change his gender. Now, having lived more years as a female than as a male, Judy's questioning of her decision to become a woman continued.
You know, I just relaxed in the bathtub, and all of a sudden my ears perked up because I heard the word homosexual on the radio. And I was like, ooh, what are they going to talk about? And so I just got real quiet in the bath, and I listened, and they were interviewing a therapist and author by the name of Richard Cohen, as he started to speak about the psychological origins of same-sex attractions, gender identity disorder. You know, it's all kind of the same thing. I said, golly, this guy, it's like he found my diaries and he's reading from my diaries. He's talking about my life. I just said, if I only would have had this information years ago, I may have never entered into the gay life. I would have never had the sex change, and I would have continued from where I was as a boy that liked girls, and I would have got rid of these unwanted homosexual desires, and I would have married somebody, and I would have been happily ever after, hopefully.
The rhetoric and strong influence some of the ex-gay groups now had on Judy's life was reflected as she spoke.
Who would want to choose a life where you feel so compelled about, you know, the confusion in your gender that you spend over $100,000 in 12 different surgeries to try and fix yourself? And now when I look back and say, well, you know what? I didn't need to fix myself with all those surgeries at all. I just needed the right information that was hidden from me. I felt angry because I felt like, you know, here was a whole supportive gay community who was trying to support me and say, oh, you're born that way, you're born that way. But, you know, there is another opinion, and I really believe that nobody's born homosexual. People are born normal, as in normal attractions to the opposite sex, but along the way they develop what I would call a homosexual problem, and people can change.
Intrigued by my conversations with Judy, and in a surprise twist, I ended up making a separate documentary project about the ex-gay movement that did not include Judy. Most of the other participants in these programs I spoke with felt that any sort of cure being suggested by these groups is rooted more in morality and conservative religious values rather than in medicine or mainstream psychology. While this brand of organized religion seemed to have helped create conflict in Judy's life, for others I spoke with, spirituality was an important part of their journey.
I had started a Native American shop up in the mountains of North Carolina. And so I had a lot of the Native American people in the community around that were up there working, you know, in the store and selling their items through the store. And that's where I started my transition, was up in the mountains of North Carolina. Came of age for myself through the Native American community with people, you know, really concerned, really wanting to help, doing anything they could. Where, you know, some sisters that have gone through this procedure have had nothing but hell to pay. A lot of our Native American tribes recognize what they call two-spirit people. Two-spirit people have been all through our history of the Native American traditions. And they were looked at basically as holy people because they had the insight of the male part, and they also had the insight of the female part. You know, when I did tell the Native American community, I immediately got support. I have a cousin, and he's full blood, and his mom, when I told them that I was going to be transgender, she was the one that wrote me the check to pay for my whole operation as a gift.
I feel that I was born with a birth defect, and that is which my soul did not match the body it was in. I can't change the fact that my body was male. I have male chromosomes. Now, I've had surgery, I've got the basic equipment, but, and there's a certain amount of vulnerability and life experience that women have, that girls have. That I did not experience. Now, I have experienced a lot of vulnerability as I have transitioned, but I certainly can't claim that. But that does not change the fact that for me, I am every bit a woman, soulfully, as any other woman is. And the only thing I can speak from is what I know, and that is my own soul and what I feel. I know that when I had surgery, I was free then not to play a role. Most people would say I'm playing a role now. It was that whole lifetime experience of having to play this other role. And now I'm free. I don't have to do it anymore. I don't have fear because I'm free.
Transgender people are much more likely to follow religion and actually embrace religion as part of their process. Not organized religion, but spiritual, good Christianity. You know, I don't pick up a Bible because I think the Bible is a historical document that, okay, fine, it has it. But I believe in spirituality as an ongoing, living, breathing process that doesn't need Scripture to tell us where to go. I think if you have faith, you let go and you follow it. You let your heart and your intuition and love guide you.
Once a person of trans experience has the opportunity to be nurtured by those around them and be on this journey of self-exploration that is positive, they're the most amazing people in the world.
I really have a lot of compassion for family members who have to go through transition with their transgender son, daughter, brother, sister, whatever. And the challenge often becomes, can they transcend the form of you? I find that if people are in love with the essence of you, your spirit, your soul, it's much easier. But to the extent that people are fixated on your form, and so many people are nowadays, there's an awful lot of emphasis on your outer trappings, then it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult. And that's a spiritual lesson. And that's related to how transgendering is, in fact, I think, a spiritual calling. It calls everything of you as a human being to come to terms with that change of what appears to only be gender, but really is a way of redefining your being based solely on your essence and your spirit, because the form is cut loose and fully redefined. That's up for grabs. It's plastic, it's malleable. And if you're fixated on form, there's usually, you're going to stumble.
It was clear that a large part of Judy's journey had involved form. She told me of the multiple surgeries she had had to modify her face, along with upper and lower body, to become a female. The cost of those surgeries totaled more than $100,000. Although having had 2 previous breast enhancement surgery, her first goal, as outlined on the website, was to have those implants removed.
For the last couple years, I've been involved with a group called Jonah. Jonah is like an acronym. It stands for Jews Offering New Alternatives to Homosexuality. People that are struggling with unwanted homosexual desires, they're working on those with psychoanalysis, reparative therapy, and we all share, you know, how things are going along our journey, and these people have become like a really nice support system for me. As I begin this journey back to become a male again, I find myself looking for all the resources again that I was looking for when I transitioned the first time. So it's like now, it's like being a female to male transsexual in almost every respect. I'm keeping track of how many donations people send in, and the funds are collected by the Jonah group. They're on the internet. I have a link to their website, jonahweb.org, and they contact Jonah and they can make these donations through them. It's a tax-deductible fund that's been set up just for my surgery funds, and I myself will never see or touch the money. I just hope and I pray, you know, this is a scary thing to do, to go back to be living as a male, a life, you know, that I left long ago, a thread that I'm picking up from age 19 to now, you know, in my 40s. I'm going to pick that thread back up, and I hope that I'll have as much success as a male as I've had as a female. It's a little bit scary, because when I left off being a male, it was scary being a male. And there's familiarity and safety in being a female. There's comfort there. And so it's almost going to be like treading some new ground.
In spite of our different lives and backgrounds, as I left South Dakota, I felt a friendship with Judy. I wasn't convinced that the religious-based rhetoric was the best advice, and was also skeptical if she was making the right decision. While I had doubt if she was actually going to go through with the surgery, less than 6 months later we met again in San Francisco. Judy had lost her job, was unemployed, and now known as Joseph. The effects of the testosterone were dramatic.
I was a 19-year-old confused kid. What am I now? I'm a 41-year-old confused kid. Bottom line, I'm the one who signed the papers that said, yes, I wanted this surgery. I believed I did. I believed it was an answer to what I was going through. But it wasn't an answer for me. It was, oh, I don't know. I mean, what do? Do I lay the blame on somebody? The only person I can lay the blame on is me. I'm the one who made the choice. Yes, there were a lot of people in my life that heavily influenced me to go this direction and supported me, including doctors, whether they were negligent or whether they were uninformed of other options that I had. Actually, I feel less at ease now than I did the first time we taped. I mean, I guess it's because I'm dealing with a certain amount of, I wouldn't call it depression, but I'm really not looking forward to the surgery. I'm looking forward to the results, but it's like my 13th surgery, another surgery.
I now found myself as a somewhat reluctant participant in the story. As Joseph had traveled to San Francisco on his own, I would be the one taking him to and from the surgery center. Once a central part and the pride of Judy's life as a dancer, the 38 triple Ds would be removed.
Right now, when they get hot.
So you're Danielle Nathanson? I'm Meg. I'll be your interview. Nice to meet you. Jennifer,
Let's just get this unpleasant event over with and let me be able to move on with my life.
As a non-transgender person, at first the idea of surgery was difficult to understand. The idea of undoing the surgery even more difficult. Even among those I spoke with, clearly there are varying opinions regarding surgery.
Don't stop us on the road to
Trinidad. So Trinidad is referring to not the island of Trinidad, but Trinidad, Colorado, where Dr. Stanley Biber practiced surgery, transsexual, what they called sex reassignment surgery, SRS. And he was the doctor that I wound up going to. I think that I was as much a woman as I am now before, even when I had a penis. And, you know, the surgery for me was like icing on the cake.
When I took over in 2003, I learned from the person who had done more GRS surgeries than anyone in the world at that time. And some estimates were as many as 5,000 surgeries that he had done. That was Dr. Biber, Stanley Biber. He did that for 35 years, and I was fortunate at age 80 to work with him side by side. The vagina is lined with a portion of the skin of the penis. So people often think of genital reassignment surgery as just an amputation. And I think that the meat cleaver comes to mind where it's...
I am a non-operative trans person. I live full-time. I spent a number of years on hormone therapy, which I have since discontinued just because I don't think I really need it anymore. And I didn't like the long-term risk factors either. So I don't see any problem in my own self-image of having breasts, a penis. I'm just missing my wings. If they had a surgery to put the wings on, I would go for that probably. So that's just me. You know, everybody has their own self-image that works for them. And when you think about it, up until Christine Jorgensen, about 50, 60 years ago, we didn't have the luxury of hormone therapies, surgeries, all that kind of thing. For the vast majority of human history, transgender people have expressed ourselves quite viably and effectively through what I like to think of as sheer projection. When you project the reality of your being, you're something of a shapeshifter because it's not so much about all the little dots that make up your image as the energy that you project to the beholder, and they see what you want them to see.
It's important to keep in mind when you think of this isn't so far-flung because males and females are anatomically almost identical until well into the second trimester. And it's only the presence or absence of the Y chromosome that determines where this fork in the road goes, where certain structures atrophy and others develop. But they all come from essentially the same tissue. So in other words, the prostate and the uterus are actually derivatives of the same tissue. It's just they just differentiate in a different direction based upon hormonal and genetic influences. Whatever influence is there that imprints the brain, these so-called, you'd think of them, you know, when they're born, they're males. And the truth is that really, if you get into the brains of people, that's where gender lies, is in the brain, not necessarily in what the anatomy is. And so, but if you get into the brain, sure enough, at age 3, 4, 5, these are kids who are thinking, you know, really, I feel so much more aligned with girls, or I have more of a feminine, you know, it's really, my inclination is really that I've got more of a feminine soul.
I always have a regret, and it's not because I didn't have it done, but it's because I wasn't born a woman. That's the regret. It isn't because, I mean, I am a woman in my head, and he forgets. But it's because I wasn't born a woman. From the age of teenage years, you know, when you first hear about the surgery, you think, you know, you're trying not to let anybody know about what your life is or anything, but in your own head, you're thinking, you know, maybe that's something that I should do, you know, because I am woman, hear me roar, you know. So, as time went on, it was really weird. It became less and less important. Because if you know who you are and you know what you are, I just think by slicing your body up, and listen, I'm not a person who is, you know, really knows a lot of, I mean, you know, people say, oh yeah, you know, I climax. But, you know, that's a big part of life is being able to climax. If you don't climax, and if you pretend you're climaxing, and people used to say, well, you know, it's 90%. You know, some of these people you talk to that were involved with the, you know, with the surgery and everything, you know, it's 90% and 10% of it is, you know, really, you know, climaxing. And I thought, you know, if I'm not going to be able to have an orgasm, and if I'm not going to be able to have a baby, what's the use? You know what I mean? And I mean, this is so weird that I'm telling you this on film because probably the whole transgender community will come after me.
Somewhere where the pavement turns to sand.
Well, I was given the gift to be able to sing and write songs. And one of my big concerns in transitioning was I going to, you know, not sing anymore because I have a very masculine sounding voice? Or was I going to continue to use that gift? And you know, in the long run, it was like, fuck it, I'm gonna keep singing, you know, I'm gonna keep using my gift.
I can't believe what they've done to you.
If you ever heard any of my songs, for example, my Native American songs, I have a song called Hoka Hey, and the opening lyrics are somewhere where the pavement turns to sand, I'm gonna walk out and make a stand. A crazy horse will vocal Jesus, it's a power deal, they've got to kill us. Now that's how that song starts. Now I can go out and try to sing that as a woman, and I can go, somewhere where the pavement turns to sand, I'm gonna walk out and make a stand. You don't even think about the lyrics anymore. You know, you're not hearing the song, you're hearing me try to sound feminine, and the only way to sing that song for me is somewhere where the pavement turns to sand, I'm gonna walk out and make a stand. Crazy horse, Anna Mae, and Jesus, it's a power deal, they got to kill us. You know, I couldn't do that in that feminine voice.
I was nearly 40 when I completed my surgery, and I moved to San Francisco. What allowed me to move forward was this notion that my therapist, Mary Cochran, taught me. There's a big difference, she said, between gender identity and sexual orientation, she taught me. Gender identity is who you are. Sexual orientation is who, if anyone, do you want to be sexual with. And one is not necessarily tied to the other. This is the first time I'd ever heard that. I had still been buying into real men sleep with women, real women sleep with men, and are attracted to the opposite sex. And to hear that broken down, to hear that I could be a woman attracted to women, whoa, this was a big deal.
I had another friend, a great friend, that we spent all our time together forever, as long as I can remember. And right before I had surgery, which was in Belgium back in 2000, we talked, and it's the only time we've talked since I left home, and he was very adamant that I had been recruited to do this or something, which is kind of funny to think somebody would be out here recruiting someone to have a gender reassignment surgery. I don't think they'd get a lot of takers. I was going to my therapist at the time because you do have to follow certain guidelines in order to have surgery and go through things. And I was going to my therapist to be able to have a session that day. And so at that point, even though I was still male, in as far as physically is concerned, I've always been female, gender-wise and soulfully, but you're required to go there and to begin living totally in the opposite gender. And this was one of the first times. And I needed some gas in my car, and I hadn't thought about it, and I was driving down the road, and I pulled into this gas station. And back then, you couldn't just stick your credit card in there and stay at your car. You had to go in and pay for it. And so I'm sitting there filling up my car, and I had forgotten about the fact of how I looked at that particular time. And I looked around, and I was at this good old boy redneck service station. And I knew I was going to have to go in there and pay for it. And all of these pickup trucks with mud all over them, and they had these huge tires on them and rifles in the back. And I had to go in there and pay for my gas. And so I thought about it. I hung up the nozzle, and I said, okay, Lord, God, universe, omnipotence, we got to go do this. You've led me this far. Let's hold our head up and go do this. And I went in there and did it. They all looked at me, and nobody said a word. And I stood right there and paid for my gas. But boy, I tell you, when I got outside, I was shaking in my boots, but I didn't shake in front of them. Yeah, Lord have mercy.
The surgery for me was the last step of my journey of trying to get to the position I wanted to be able to have the peaceful feeling that I have inside of me. It was just the last hill that I had to climb. After the surgery, you know, yes, you had the pain, you had the discomfort that you have to deal with any surgery. But I didn't look at it really as a lot of pain. I looked at it as finally becoming myself. You know, like anybody that's been born, there is a certain amount of pain. And for me, spiritualized, it was like being reborn into my correct gender that I always felt that I was.
Sometimes after any surgery, doesn't matter what it is, gynecologic or general surgery, whatever, there's a bit of depression. And there are, certainly with this, people sometimes will get into kind of a mode of, oh, you know, they've had their whole life gearing towards this, and then there's a sense of letdown that's it, there's nothing more to go after. Now I just have to live life, and life is just ordinary. So we certainly see some of that too. But for the most part, the people here just glow. And they glow immediately after surgery. I mean, they're just thrilled and grateful in a really profound way. I've delivered somewhere around 3,000 babies in my 19 years as an OBGYN, but there's nothing, and those are amazing events, and something that I cherish each and every one of those moments that I've had with parents that have, you know, when you can present that baby to them and put that baby on their stomach, and you know, it's really, that is a very, very powerful role to play in someone's life. But this I think is bigger, actually. I think it's even seen as, people are even more grateful even than the birth of one of their own children. You know, it's hard to quantify that, but you know, at least I'd say comparable.
Trying to piece this unusual story together, 6 months after his surgery, I met again with Joseph in South Dakota. Since the surgery, he's had a regular bodybuilding routine and is at the gym at least 4 days a week. Ironically, due to the loss of some tissue, his chest muscles have been difficult to fully develop. The religious rhetoric was gone, and he seemed to have a more open and honest perspective.
What's between my legs now, I look at it a lot differently. To me, it's kind of a mixture. you know, because the surgery does leave part of the internal penis in there. So it's sort of like having a very small penis in a way. You know, now that I'm living as a gay male, it's not so easy. I don't have all the equipment that's expected of a gay male. And yes, I may look attractive, you know, maybe have a few muscles, guys think I'm cute, but I can't take things further than a friendship, really. When is the right moment to tell a guy, it's like, well, sorry, I don't have a penis. Oh, why is that? What happened? I mean, do I make up the, well, there was an accident on the farm. I'm a Gulf War veteran and I had him blown off, or do I say, oh, I had a sex change when I was 19 and then I decided I didn't want to be a sex change anymore, so I went back to living as, when is the right time? And when is somebody like me find somebody that can look past that and love the man and just not what's between his legs? It's regrettable in some ways. You know, I said some things to hurt people, but, you know, I said some things to build people up too. I don't have anything against the transgender community. I mean, I'm still part of it. You know, whether I'm living as a female or as a male, I'm still there. Gay, transgendered, whatever, wherever box people want to put me in. And, you know, like I said, you know, it may not have worked out for me anymore. It kind of lost its effectiveness. But some people, it's a good decision and they're happy for the rest of their lives.
Referring to the transgender community Joseph spoke about, I learned that it has a growing number of perspectives and yet a growing unity.
I was saying that you didn't have to be a man, you didn't have to be a woman. I'm saying there are more possibilities than man or woman. And a lot of trans women of that day were taking this as undermining all the work they were doing to be real women. There's room to be not men, not women these days. And what I'm particularly gratified by is the rise of this thing called genderqueer, which is very different than the transgender movement. The transgender movement was this big umbrella thing that still said that, well, okay, yeah, there are men and there are women, and you don't have to be either, and we understand that most of the world is one or the other. Okay, great. And you can mess around with gender to your heart's content. Genderqueer takes that and turns the volume up a whole lot. Genderqueer is an intentional fucking around with gender cues, an intentional mixing of gender cues to create, I don't know what effect. I'm not a genderqueer.
For a number of years, Kate Bornstein has written and spoken about gender issues, hoping to further educate non-transgender individuals. She often appears on college campuses.
So I do a couple of pieces nowadays. I'll start off with a piece about that got published in the New York Times Sunday magazine about my mom's funeral, and attending my mom's funeral as a woman with all these people who she never told about it because she knew she would be torn to shreds by the gossip mongers of the town. So there I am, and people are, who are you?
My mother died before she could hear the blue-haired ladies ask, who are you? Of the tall, tall woman with mascara running down her cheeks. She never heard the producer from the Ricky Lake show ask me, who are you? When I told her I'm not a man. And I'm not a woman. She never heard the Philadelphia Society matron asked me the same question when I attempted to join and attend her private women-only AA group. No, my mother only once asked me, who are you? It was about a week before she died. Who are you, Albert? She asked anxiously, mixing up names and pronouns in the huge dose of morphine. Who are you? could I do? I told her the truth. I told her I was her baby. I always would be. I told her I was her little boy and the daughter she never had. I told her I loved her. Ha! She'd exclaimed, satisfied with my proffered selection of who's. That's good. I didn't want to lose any of you, ever.
While most often associated with the gay and lesbian community, many I spoke with feel that people don't always understand the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation.
So this is not a sexual preference problem. This is an identity crisis. We already know what we like sexually speaking. Some of us are heterosexual women, some of us are lesbian women, some of us are bisexual women. I'm probably bisexual. I never really was prior to my surgery, but now I feel released from my testosterone bonds, and I can be anything that I want to be now. There's a lot of gay folks that are prejudiced against transsexuals. Most of them figure, well, you're just gay and don't want to admit it.
Homosexuality and lesbianism is really about sexuality. And what you see over and over and over again is that transsexuality is really about identity. It's just really about expressing your soul. And so sexuality is only an outcome of one's identity, if you'll accept that. The things that are in common are that both groups report from a very early age of feelings of being identified either sexually or identity-wise with what would be considered non-biological. So males attracted to males, or males feeling as though they had feminine feelings inside, and therefore identifying with women. So that's a commonality.
My sense, having observed a lot of political activity coming from not just the transgender community, but the GLBT community, is that we are very, very diverse. And there are a number of agendas, each of which are important, and different elements of our community are struggling to make headway on a number of fronts, whether it's the right to marry, the right to express a gender, what have you. These are all very important things. You have, for instance, certain passing queer folk who are totally unnerved by the notion of genderqueer people rocking their boat and their credibility. I understand that. And then you've got the genderqueer folks saying, what's the big deal? Don't you want to be a little more honest about who you are and have that freedom? Because the moment they detect the least little difference, you're in the same boat as we are.
18 months after our first meeting and a year after his surgery, I saw Joseph again in New York City. He had traveled there to appear in one of those syndicated talk shows where sensationalism outweighs substance. We talked about Judy. I confessed to feeling some sadness now that Judy was gone.
Looking at some footage here that we took over a year ago when I was still living as female. She was pretty. Embarrassed by it? No, it's part of my life. But it's looking at this film, that person's gone. She was a sweet person in my life. It almost makes me kind of sad. She was a sweet, good person, and now she's gone. She never got what she wanted out of the journey that she was on, and now she's gone. I formerly had a website, the notorious helpmereversemysexchange.org. Oh my God. You know, it had its purpose and time. These people were trying to help me, and I was trapped between two worlds. And I eventually just decided I had to take my website down because I couldn't be pulled between these two worlds of thought. And now after this transition to living as male, there's people out there that think, well, how genuine was this first transition to female? And I tell you, it was very genuine. I never thought over most of the 20-year period that I lived as a female, I never had a thought that I would ever go back to living as a male. It was only once the ex-gay groups got a hold of me and tried to tell me that people are not born gay, you know, there's no such thing really as transsexual, they're all deluded. It planted a lot of doubts in my mind at a very vulnerable time in my life. So now that I've transitioned to live as male again, people are thinking, well, is this Joseph Kirchner's flavor of the week? I mean, is he really stable in his gender status now, presenting as male? And you know, all I can tell you is, for all of my life, as a child and as an adult, the past 20 years, I never had an inkling that I'd ever transition back to living as male. And I can't tell you what's up in the future. All I know is right now, this is a very comfortable place for me to be.
While I remembered Holly's words about knowing the essence of someone, surprisingly, I still miss Judy. As I work to complete the editing, I've stayed in touch with Joseph, who is employed again. His unusual journey to find his place in the world continues to have some hills and valleys. Joseph recently made plans to travel to California to undergo cosmetic procedures with a plastic surgeon to enhance his male chest. I think talking with such an articulate group of women was pretty enlightening, but still left a lot to learn. When my travels were all said and done, it was comforting to know that most of those I spoke with seemed at peace with their journeys.
God, I've met so many people of trans experience that are so comical and are so genuine and have the ability to engage almost anybody or be able to be to divulge very personal things in a way that, you know, people are so private and they want to keep all their little secrets in their little bag. So many trans people have like said, you know, I don't have to live that life. I don't have to live that way. I could just be, and you're gonna know who I am.
It's not about presentation. It's about who you are. And I am now free to be, and I can't tell you what that feels like. It's difficult. You know, when you think about someone and who they are, and when you want to describe them, what's the first thing you say? You say, is it a man or a woman? Is it a boy or a girl? When a baby, is it a boy or a girl? And so when you don't have that quite right, then that's something you live with forever. And there is internally a lot of conflict and agitation. And I don't have any agitation anymore. I don't have fear.
I went to my 25th class reunion. And I walked in there as grand as can be. I sure did. Because they were so horrible to me in high school. Terrible. And I went. And a lot of people came up to me and apologized to me. And that was almost 10 years ago now. Yeah. And but I had a lot of the men, the boys, come up to me. Well, they were boys then, men now, come up to me and apologize.
So, you know, every year that I'm alive, I'd learn more and more about myself. I become more at peace with the world, with the surroundings. I understand people a lot more now. I don't put expectation on people.
I'm starting now in middle age to come to that place where I really don't care much about gender anymore. I'm a little over it, and I'm looking forward to a time when it just won't matter anymore, and I can just be fully myself in the moment.
When we talk about diversity and the spectrum of things, in every other realm, nature is represented by diversity. So, you know, you don't just see one eye color, you don't see one hair color or body shape, or or height is the one I really think is instructive, because although you would say, in general, if you see someone who is 5'5", you would say, that's probably a female, but not necessarily. Or if you see someone who's 6'1", probably that's a male, but not necessarily. So just because you see someone with a penis, why is it so surprising that that might not necessarily be a male?
I know the world's a lonely place where everyone wants to play it safe. But right now, the safest place, it's not what we need. So take the leap and keep the faith. Breathe until it's no more blood. Face your fears without a parachute. Do you believe? I believe. Now that I believe in love, I believe. Come on, help me.
Thanks for watching this DVD. There's some bonus material coming up, but first I wanted to show you some previews of some of my other projects. There's a companion piece to Almost Myself titled Fish Can't Fly. Informative and often quite poignant, it's a story about gays and spirituality. It also contains interviews with people who are involved in the so-called ex-gay programs.
The average Joe that you meet in the queer world, it seems, when you mention God, there's this reaction of, I don't want to hear it. Why do you put up with that foolishness? I don't want anything to do with it. And a lot of it comes from their own hurt and rejection that they experience.
Faithful, Lord, faithful.
So my spirituality was growing, and so I thought, well, I certainly don't want to give up my spirituality. I guess I'll have to give up my sexuality.
Of course, these groups think you can change. They believe that the ministry, whatever it is that they're involved in, whether it be Exodus or Love in Action, whatever they are, they believe that that can change a gay person or a homosexual person to heterosexual.
They can hurt people deeply with their programs and not mean to. It's better to take that to God and be honest with it and let Him use it as it is, and be the best gay Christian that you can possibly be.
And it leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be.
My latest film is titled Tell. It's a timely and fascinating look at the lives of LGBT veterans, reflecting on their lives in the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
I went over with the 82nd Division. We went right up to the border of Germany and went into combat immediately.
The military can be a leader here, and for that reason I really think this is one of the most important issues in our community.
Well, you can talk to a recruiter, but you already admitted to me that you're homosexual, and you know that the policy is that you cannot enlist in any part of the military if you admit to being a homosexual.
I was a gunner on the
50 caliber machine gun on top of the Humvee. Never saw him or anything. He must have just jumped up, fired, and jumped back down, and he shot, well, RPG-7, rocket-propelled grenade.
Had 12 people die in my arms as I was either bringing them into the OR from the helicopter or who died in surgery, which had a profound effect on the rest of my life.
It made me so proud to show that we're veterans, we serve this country, and we need to be recognized. And that Sergeant of the Guard did recognize us.
Making Almost Myself has been a really interesting experience. While it focuses on just a very small part of the community, I hope it does shed some light on what it means to be transgender. The film had successful screenings at a number of film festivals and other venues. I was pleased to learn that the film won the Jury Award for Best Documentary at the Tampa International Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. It also won the Audience Award for Audience Favorite at the Southwest Gay and Lesbian Film Festival in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been fortunate to attend a number of screenings, and one of the most common questions I get is people asking about how Joseph is doing. We do stay in touch by email, and we talk on the phone from time to time. He's attending college and trying to make some additional changes in his life beyond what you saw in the film. While I didn't have the opportunity to go back to South Dakota to talk to him again for these final comments, I did ask him to send along some thoughts in the form of a home video. In his story, Joseph shares some new information that may shed some additional light on his story. Rather interesting twist.
I thought I'd send you a bit of an update, video diary update, if you will, on how I'm doing now. It's basically 2 years since we started the production on Almost Myself. 2 tumultuous years. I mean, gosh, we got it all on tape. It's pretty amazing watching somebody go through a transition like that. I watched, you know, what you've got together now that's going out to the film festivals. I look angry. I look upset. Yeah, I think a lot of people might be upset if they were mistakenly diagnosed as transsexual when they weren't. Unbeknownst to the Almost Myself audience, and not everybody's probably been to my website, josephkirchner.com, but during the filming of Almost Myself, my doctor who did my hormone prescriptions, you know, before he started anything, he wanted to get a baseline, do a chromosome test on me. The results came back and they really were kind of a shock to me to find out that I'm intersexed. Basically, for people who don't know what intersex means, maybe they know what hermaphrodite means. Yeah, I was born one of those. The age of 1, the doctors did surgery on me to bring down the testicles so they could be preserved. They took the labia, fused it together to make a scrotal sac. Now, when they did that, they found that one of my testicles was considered unhealthy. They removed it because it had developed somewhere in between an ovary and a testicle. It's what's called an ovotestis. And those are thought to be cancerous, so they removed them. Now, also, I was not informed of this my whole life. My parents kept it from me, and I really don't blame them because I'm sure they wanted me to grow up to be the most normal, healthy boy that I could, you know, unscathed by this information. But, you know, it really didn't turn out that way because, you know, from age 12, growing up with breast and inside feeling like a girl and a boy at the same time, you know, I was already at the breaking point. So, you know, at age 17, I went into therapy, and I was in therapy for 5 years, you know, before I had surgery at age 24, you know, to completely become as if I were female. Little did I know, there was this undercurrent. My geneticist, Dr. Virginia Johnson at the South Dakota State University Genetics Department, you know, during subsequent blood tests to check my chromosomes, what I call the renegade X's in my XYXO chromosome pattern, they have been steadily dropping off over the years. So, maybe that undercurrent in my life where I felt the masculine qualities, wanting to come out, maybe that was me actually morphing into more of a genetic XY male. Now, I'm really happy, Tom. This is the first time in my life I feel like I've been able to make an informed decision, because the intersex status being revealed is like the last piece in the puzzle, and like this dark cloud has gone away over the top of my head, and I'm finally able to be me, a fully integrated person that doesn't have to hide anything. I'm back in school full time, picking up a thread that I dropped way so many years ago. But now, Joseph is like out completely. I'm the president of my college Gay Straight Alliance. We got a web page and everything that's connected to my home page. I'm now a person who knows who I am. I'm confident in who I am, identifying as male. I'm happy and able to be me for the first time in my life. Yeah, I feel like I'm almost myself, Tom, and life is good. I'm a psychology major at my college, working towards being a doctor, that thread I dropped all those years ago. And, I'm able to finally make a lot more friends because I'm able to be much more open and truthful about who I am. Life is really good for me now, Tom, and I look forward to many more good years in this life. And hey, Tom, I want to thank you for doing this documentary. It's helped me. It's helped the others, I'm sure, that have been in this documentary. And it helps the rest of the world, people who see it, to be able to understand what transgender people go through and what intersex people go through. I guess I'm kind of a different person. I'm that intersex, transsexual person. But anyway, Tom, thanks a lot. And I hope this update is what you needed to wrap my story up. Okay? Thanks, Tom. Bye-bye.
As I began editing the film, it was clear that the film was going to be the stories of the personal lives of the individuals that I spoke with. And what some would consider perhaps a little bit off topic, there was one segment that I was not able to include, or because of time constraints as well, was not able to include in the final cut of the film. While I was in Los Angeles, I attended the Day of Remembrance service, which was held in West Hollywood, California. It's an event to honor transgender people who have been the victims of crime and hate and have died. It was a very powerful experience.
Actually, the Day of Remembrance was initiated mostly in part by a transgender activist that's really well-renowned. Her name is Gwendolyn Ann Smith. And she works mostly out of San Francisco and has a website called gender.org. Within that website, she also maintains a website called a web page called Remembering Our Dead, which she compiles data of those transgendered people who pass away due to being victims of hate crimes or believed hate crimes. Many of the hate crimes do not have any suspects, and even less of them are actually prosecuted. Well, one of the things that's really happened, and it's classic and it's been obvious in the community, as the LGBT community as a whole, is that even in the stating of it, T is usually at the end. And so it's quite understandable sometimes, because sexual orientation and gender identity are quite two different things. I always explain to people that it's like apples and oranges. They have different tastes, but at the end they're all fruit. That's my little analogy on it. But it seems as though the gay rights movement progressed. Transgender rights or transgender issues kind of fell to the wayside, and we became what we call stonewalled. And it's now, and that's one of the things that I'm grateful for being alive at the time that I am and being involved in working with the transgender community now, is because you're seeing that snowball, you're seeing that really grow, and you're seeing that cohesiveness within the community begin to solidify. Basically, the way that this Day of Remembrance here in Los Angeles is set up, it's quite unique. It's actually very different. It's the first time that we're looking at it not only as a commemoration and a celebration or a ceremony, but we're also incorporating a demonstration at the end of the ceremony. We're going to start doing a demonstration to end the trans-panic defense, which is allowable in court here in California at least.
I think that we are more than awakened from sleep. I think that people are awake and we're moving forward. And this day is a day to give us a reminder and remember what the ugly head of prejudice is all about and what intolerance is all about. But it's also a day to not focus on that, but to keep moving forward and keep imagining what the world would be if people just accepted the uniqueness of each and every one of us.
I'm Robert Binnenfield, and I practiced medicine for 26 years. On the 21st of December, Jason Bardsley showed up at my home in Monroe, New York. Bardsley has pled guilty to strangling me, citing a transgender panic-style defense, and was given only 20 years in prison.
On March 1st, a phone repairman found my body near a hillside, just a short distance from my home. I was stabbed to
In a
death.
hotel near the center of Marseille. My throat was cut, as were my genitals.
My body was discovered in July at my home where I had been stabbed several times and bled to death. A 20-year-old man is admitted to my killing.
Possibly even mutilated. I was 23 years
Full of
old.
blood, begging for help. I died at the hospital nearly an hour.
Let's go! All to the line, let's go, to the straight! Vicky! Louder! 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 Demand liberation! Trannies in this Louder! Bigots, surrender! Respect transgenders!
An indication of what the future outlook may be was represented by one of the speakers at the rally following the march. Colin is a young heterosexual high school student.
First of all, I'd like to thank all the tireless activists for organizing this march, and thank you for all of you who are here tonight. Now, I'm a high school student at Maricosta High School, and as a high school student, I got to tell you something. I know the meaning of fear. The fear of not belonging. The fear of being stared at because you're different. The fear of being bullied or beaten because of that difference. Are we still going to blame the black man for being lynched? Are we still blaming the girl for causing the rape? Are we still going to blame the gay or transgender for causing their own murder? When will we be past the point where the victim is blamed for the hate crime?
Right?
Throw away the lies that make you blind.
Closing, I hope you'll check out some of my other films, and I do have some additional projects in the work, so be sure and check my website. Last but not least, I wanted to share my first experience making a music video. Thanks again for watching the film.
You be Amelia Earhart. And I'll be Georgie O'Keeffe. Fly me straight to heaven. And I'll paint you a masterpiece. We'll take a slow boat with Shirley. We'll astral plane to the stars. And we'll talk with the grandmothers and the grandfathers. And trade tales on electric guitars.
Every cowgirl gets the blues. Every cowgirl pays her dues.
we'll never make it on our own. When they wake from the dreams they've blown, we'll be in Trinidad.
You better take my 6-gun before I shoot someone. I don't need my 6-gun, child. It's too late for me to die young. You be Louise, I'll be Thelma. We'll drive our Thunderbird across this barren land. No savior rides this herd.
Every cowgirl gets the blues.
Every cowgirl pays her dues.
Every Johnny
thinks
we'll never make it on our own.
when they wake from the dreams they've blown, we'll be in Trinidad. Join me on the road to Trinidad. Won't you join me on the road to Trinidad? They can't stop us on the road to Trinidad. They won't stop us on the road to Trinidad. Rock on, Mother Jones. The ultimate kiss. Now there are too many heroes in heaven, or else they all wind up in jail. They're tortured in silence. Shut up. Onto the cross they are nailed. I'm following Indians, outlaws, and Angie DeVoe, riding these Oklahoma plains. They got guns, we got truth, bringing those bad boys to shame.
Every cowgirl gets the blues.
Every cowgirl pays her dues. Every Johnny
We'll never
thinks
make it on our own.
when they wake from the dreams they've blown, we'll be in Trinidad. Join me on the road to Trinidad. Oh, won't you join me on the road to Trinidad? They can't stop us on the road to Trinidad. They won't stop us on the road to Trinidad. No, 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 no. They won't stop us on the road to Trinidad.